Good evening. Tonight's episode of Spectral Margins features some of our heavier topics, such as homicide, murder, loss of a child, and loss of, well, sanity itself.
You're back. Good. I was starting to think you'd finally learned your lesson, but no. Here you are again, pressing your ear to the unknown, waiting for something to whisper back. Welcome to Spectral Margins, the place where reality gets thin. I'm Lucius Voss, your midnight tour guide to the things that go bump, scratch, and softly call your name when no one else is home. Tonight, we are opening doors. Literally, metaphorically, and in ways you'll probably regret. Because let's be honest, if a door is closed, it's closed for a reason. Our first tale, a haunted house story. But not the kind where things crash and shatter. No. This one's quieter. Sadder. It lingers. Like that text you sent 3 years ago and never got a reply to? Are the dead really gone, or are they just waiting on the other side? And more importantly, if you could hear them, could you ever stop listening? Then, we have Closet Space by Brett O'Reilly. A childhood fear that should have stayed buried. A man who's convinced he's outgrown the monsters under the bed. Spoiler, he has not. You know that feeling when you leave the closet door open just a crack at night? This story will confirm everything you've ever feared about that choice. So turn the lights down low, get comfortable, and maybe check your closet doors firmly shut. No reason, just, safety first. And now, Doors by Richard Saxon. This story is performed by Kris Konkol.
My grandmother used to say her house was haunted. "They're on the other side of the doors. If you listen closely, you can hear them," she'd say. Her words weren't those of an afraid woman. They weren't filled with sadness nor despair, but rather joy. She'd tell me stories about the ghosts that had stayed behind in her house. And as she did, her eyes were always filled with longing and love. "So they're not bad ghosts?" I would ask, too young to understand the complexities of good and evil. "Of course not, sweetheart. They would never hurt you." I truly loved my grandma, but I didn't visit her often. My mother wouldn't let me. To her, the house had an uneasy atmosphere, once full of malice, as if an unknown and frightening entity loomed over the place. It didn't help that we lived several hours away, making it difficult for Grandma to visit us with her advancing age and declining health. It made me sad that she lived all alone in such a big old house, but she didn't seem to mind it. "I'm not alone," she would say. "Our love kept us together even after he passed." I knew she was talking about my grandpa, her late husband. However, she mentioned several figures that kept her company, people I assumed were her parents and even some who could have been siblings. Back in her day, people remained at home to die, spending their last moments with loved ones, comfortable at home in their beds. Because of that, a multitude of different people had drawn their last breaths in her very own house. As time went by, my memories of the old house started to fade. I was too busy growing up, and my mother didn't care to visit her childhood home. At the ripe old age of 95, my grandmother passed away, peacefully at home, with a smile still lingering on her face. Her last will and testament arrived a couple weeks later. By that time, I hadn't seen her in years, and the sight of her papers made me feel a bit guilty. There wasn't much of a personal message left behind, but it was stated that my mother would inherit all of her belongings, everything save for her house, which was left to me. Seeing as I was just in the process of getting married to my very pregnant fiancée, it would be the perfect gift to start our newlywed life. We moved in about a month later, after spending what little money we had left refurbishing the place. Unlike the warm yet mystical feeling the house had held when I was a child, it felt cold, eerie as an adult. Even with new furniture and fixed frames, the house was still loud with creaks and strange whispers behind each closed door. My fiancée, soon-to-be wife, Alice, also noticed the strange fog of weirdness looming over the house, and my mother was still hesitant to visit. But when all things were said and done, my grandma had led a full and happy life in that house, and no harm had ever come to her, so we were eager to start our life together. It truly turned out to be an idyllic place, perfect to raise children, with lush green fields and vast forests surrounding the neighborhood. We spent the next decade there, gifted with 2 children, a young boy named Alex and a little girl named Amanda. From the very beginning, it looked like we were in the makings of a happily ever after. Alas, it wasn't meant to be. On the 3rd of September 2017, my entire family was killed in a burglary gone horribly wrong. I don't remember much from the night itself, just that I woke up to strange sounds and a shattering window. I wasn't particularly a brave man, but if my family was put at risk, I'd do whatever I could to defend them. I grabbed the baseball bat I was planning to give Alex for his 10th birthday and went to investigate in the dark. Before I could even turn the corner, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my chest as one of the intruders lodged a knife in between my ribs. I fell to the ground, unable to breathe and unable to move my legs. I tried to call out for my wife, to warn her about the approaching men, to give her a chance to get the kids and run, but my lungs had filled with blood and I couldn't get a single coherent word out. There I lie, dying helplessly on the floor as my wife tried to fight off the 2 men that had entered our house. She screamed as they stabbed her, quickly going from panic to a gargle to silence. Then everything went black. I guess they didn't bother double-checking, or maybe the pool of blood I'd produced around me made me look dead. But despite their best efforts at exterminating my family, I had somehow survived. I awoke as the ambulance rushed me to the hospital, and I cried for my family as they prepped me for surgery. I didn't know they'd all been killed yet. I still had hope. But that tiny amount of belief that my wife and children had survived was quickly extinguished. According to the police, the intruders were junkies looking for anything they could sell. During the break-in, they'd been doped out of their minds and attacked anyone in their vicinity. Even as the police chased them down, they fought back, which ultimately resulted in them both getting shot dead. No closure, no coherent reason for the break-in, why they'd chosen our house rather than the neighbor's vacant home. I was left with no good explanation, no justice. As for myself, the stab wound had been deep. So much that the knife had partially damaged my spine, enough to leave me with limited use of my legs and left arm. It would take months of rehabilitation before I could even go back to an empty house. Naturally, my mother wanted me to stay with her until I could come to terms with what had happened. She had gotten old, but she still wanted to take care of me, help me through the trying times. She meant well, but in a morbidly depressing way, staying in that house was the last connection I had to my deceased family. It was a place of love, filled with memories of a life brutally cut short. Though I felt more connected to them at home, I couldn't sleep in our old bedroom nor enter our children's rooms. Instead, I slept in the guest room, one of the few places still untainted by tragedy. The next few weeks were spent in a haze of denial and anger at myself that I'd failed to save my family. In just the span of 5 minutes, my entire world had been shattered beyond repair, and I saw no solace in the foreseeable future. The house still made its usual weird sounds, creaks, howling wind, and whispers behind each and every closed door. They'd always kept me company, but in the past they'd been little more than a vague presence, something to ignore, to push to the back of my mind. After the tragedy, they seemed to wake up, becoming coherent and understandable. As I listened intently to the house speaking, the strange whispers started to take shape. Before long, I could actually understand them. One night, 3 weeks and a day after my return home, I awoke to the sound of a voice coming from down the hall. I shot to my feet and slowly approached the sounds. It was someone singing, a beautiful, cheerful voice coming from inside our old bedroom. But it wasn't just any song. No, it was one my wife frequently used to hum as she got ready in the morning. Some old Italian verse her mother used to sing to her when she was a kid. While I never understood the words, it had always comforted me, even on the most stressful day. It had become a symbol of love, peace, one I missed every day without her. "Alice?" I said, starting to wonder if I was dreaming. I pressed my ear against the door in disbelief at hearing my dead wife's voice. She didn't respond. She just kept singing on the other side. As soon as I confirmed it was her voice, I hopelessly barged in through the door, distraught to find it empty on the other side, filled with nothing but an empty bed and a closet full of clothes never to be worn again. For a second, I'd felt a grain of happiness, but it was swiftly taken away as her serene voice vanished in the darkness of night. I collapsed to the floor and cried for the first time since their deaths. I'd been so numb that my ability to feel had simply shut down, but the overwhelming emotion I felt from hearing my wife again finally broke me. I fell asleep on the floor that night, and once I awoke, I convinced myself it had all just been a dream, nothing more. That heartbreaking belief lasted until the next night when I awoke to laughter coming from Alex's bedroom. "Alex, is that you?" I called out as I approached his closed door. That, along with the sound of toys being flung around and light footsteps running around the room, made me temporarily forget everything that had happened in the past few months. "Alex," I said again with tears in my eyes. But he couldn't hear me, and once I opened the door, I was met with another dark, silent room. In the blink of an eye, I was plunged back into reality, alone and afraid. As I felt his presence vanish, I thought back to my childhood, spending time with my grandmother, listening to her stories. "They're on the other side of the doors, always there. If you listen closely, you can hear them," she'd say. The whispers I had heard since I was a kid were real, just too vague and hard to decipher. My grandma heard her husband because he was the person she loved the most in the entire world, and that's why I couldn't understand. Now that the ghosts belonged to my family, it became abundantly clear why my grandmother loved that house so much. It was because she could stay surrounded by her lost loved ones. Each night, the voices continued. Next in line was my daughter, Amanda. I heard her jumping up and down while she talked to her stuffed animals, pretending they were real creatures out on adventures. She sang to them with a voice as beautiful as her mother's, and I listened while holding my breath. That night, I never opened the door. I just sat there listening to her play around, smiling as I was once again living in a house full of life. It quickly became a nightly routine. I'd sleep during the day, and at night, I'd huddle up outside the bedroom doors with a blanket, just to listen to them go about their lives, not knowing what terrible things had happened to them. Days, weeks, and even months passed, and I lived my life vicariously through them, unable to let go. It wasn't a great life, but it was all I had. I couldn't stand to lose my connection to them, so I kept at it. My wife was the first to break her usual nighttime routine. She'd usually awaken me with the sound of her singing or by telling bedtime stories to our kids, but that would all come to a crashing end. On that particular night, I was jolted awake to the sound of her terrified screams. I shot to my feet and instinctively called out for her. On the other side of the closed door, I heard her struggle, demanding that someone stay away from her. It was an all too familiar memory, one I'd struggled to forget. It was the moment the killers entered our room to murder her. I burst through the door, knowing fully well that I couldn't help, but that I could at least end the nightmare. As usual, once the door had been opened, everything fell silent. Then I heard cries coming from Alex's room. He'd been awoken by Alice's screams and wanted to find out what was going on. His cries were quickly shut up as one of the intruders entered his room and slit his throat. I heard a short whimper before he too fell silent. Last in line was Amanda, but I quickly opened the door before I could be tortured by the sounds of her frantic screams as the intruders ended her life. Following that night, I decided to leave the doors open. No matter the fact that I'd never hear from my family again, I just couldn't face their deaths for a third or fourth time. Alas, once nightfall came, the doors were inexplicably shut, and the ordeal started all over. The screams of my wife and children, their cries as they realized what was about to happen to them, my failure to save them, it all crushed me. In the end, I had no option left but to remove each door from its hinges, to end the nightmare once and for all. Only the bathroom and guest room doors remained. It worked. Without a filter between the real world and the past, I had nothing to listen to, nothing save the deafening silence of an empty house. It was an impossible choice to live peacefully without the comforting voices of my family. Never again would I hear them die, but I'd also be left alone, forever. Then, I heard the sound of someone crying. I was heading to bed when I heard a familiar voice sobbing through the guest room door. It wasn't my wife, nor the cries of a child. It was me. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save you." I stood speechless, too terrified to even open the door, but I was quickly brought back to my senses when I heard a gunshot from the other side, followed by a quiet thump, and then nothing. Until that point, the house had always spoken to me with voices from the past. But then, something more sinister had approached, something that hadn't yet happened. I didn't go to sleep that night, nor did I dare to enter the guest room. I simply sat at my kitchen table until I passed out from the haze of exhaustion and alcohol, and once daylight arrived, I removed that door as well. Whether what I heard behind that door is my ultimate destiny, or if I can somehow survive this nightmare, remains to be seen. I can't say I haven't thought about ending it all, but for now, I've just removed every single door from my house. At least it's finally quiet.
That was Doors by Richard Saxon. A reminder that grief doesn't fade, it just changes shape. Sometimes into memories, sometimes into whispers, sometimes into that creak you swear came from upstairs, even though you live alone. Richard Saxon specializes in making you second guess the silence. If you want more of his work, you know where to find it. Lurking in the digital void, waiting. All right, let's shake that one off. Deep breath, hydrate, maybe text your mom and tell her you love her. Okay, good. Now, let's move on. Our next tale, oh, this one's fun. A bedtime story for those of us who never really stop checking under the bed, or behind the shower curtain, or, making sure that weird shape in the corner is actually just a pile of laundry. And now, Closet Space, performed by me, Lucius Voss, and Sinister sweetheart, N.M. Brown. Rob stood in the doorway and stared into the abyss beyond. An impenetrable blackness of fathomless depths and untold horrors seemed to stretch out before him. And was that movement?
Daddy?
Rob started. Before him, 2 shelves sat with boxes, knickknacks, and old toys scattered haphazardly. Below, a child's dresses and sweaters hung from a bar, just his imagination running away with him. Again. With a flush of embarrassment, he closed the closet door and turned to his daughter Noelle, her deep brown eyes framed by curly brown locks.
Are you okay?
Rob smiled and adjusted his glasses, caught a glimpse of himself in the vanity mirror against the far wall beside the bed. Tall and dark, he shared his curls with Noelle, a striking contrast to her mother who was short, blonde, and straight-haired. The one thing Noelle possessed of both Rob and Cassie was her deep brown eyes, currently scrutinizing him in the lamplight. Rob was thankful the light was dim enough to hide the red in his cheeks. "I'm fine, honey. Just got lost in thought."
If you were lost, you wouldn't be in my bedroom.
Rob couldn't help but smile at her cheekiness. "Haha, very funny. I was actually just thinking of how much I'm going to miss you and your mom when you leave for guide camp tomorrow."
Oh, Daddy.
Noelle sighed.
We're only going for 2 days. Surely you'll be fine for 2 days.
Rob laughed to himself as he sat down on the edge of the bed. Noelle's words and exasperated look on her 9-year-old face were straight from her mother's repertoire. "I know it's only 2 days, but I'm still going to miss you." Noelle smiled.
I'm going to miss you too.
She sat up and hugged him. He hugged her back. "Good night, honey."
Good night, Daddy.
He kissed his daughter goodnight and walked out of the room, turning off the light on the way. He only stopped for a moment to close the closet door, which was still ajar. Rob waved goodbye as Cassie pulled out of the driveway. Noelle waved back from the passenger seat, dressed head to toe in her guide uniform. Rob watched until they pulled out of sight, sighed, then closed the front door and listened to the silence of the house. A touch of melancholy tinged his sensation of freedom as he contemplated what to do first. Order Chinese, he thought to himself, then catch up on season 2 of Creeper. On his way to the kitchen, he closed the hall closet, which was open a crack. Rob blinked, prodded awake by some unknown stimulus. Slowly, he sat up on the couch. His glasses had slipped halfway down his face during his impromptu nap. He pushed them back up. The coffee table, bare except for a television remote and a plate of sweet and sour stickiness and a pair of chopsticks, sat bathed in the sullen light of the TV. A preview for Creeper played on the screen, locked in an endless advertising rotation. A loud crash sounded from the far end of the house. Startled, Rob leapt to his feet. Frozen in place, he focused on the sound, listening for some follow-up noise. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. Rob took a deep breath, considered grabbing the chopsticks as a makeshift weapon, discarded the idea. Carefully, ears straining, he made his way into the darkened hall. Still nothing. He reached for the light switch and flicked it. Light flooded the hallway leading past the downstairs bathroom and the kitchen to the front door. Nothing, except at the far end of the hall, the closet door stood ajar. Rob searched through his memories. He had closed the door. Hadn't he closed the door? Had he? Suddenly, he wasn't sure. He stopped himself, took a deep breath, and reminded himself there was nothing inside the closet. Certainly, no such thing as shadowy, half-imagined monsters. Certainly, not the kind that had briefly haunted his childhood. He was 7 years old when it happened. An overnight stay at his grandparents' house saw him occupying the guest room, his dad's childhood room, after an evening of pizza and Romoli. On the edge of sleep, he rolled over to see the closet door standing open, and a pair of glowing green eyes staring at him from the depths. At first, Rob was curious, unsure of what he was seeing. As he listened, tinny carnival music issued from the depths of the closet, and he recalled the old antique jack-in-the-box that sat on the upper shelf just out of reach. With that thought, his eyes adjusted to the dark, and fear flooded his mind. In the soft glow of moonlight through the bedroom window, he could make out the jack-in-the-box's crank as it wound round and round, each revolution seeming to extend towards him motley covered arms that ended in white gloves and razor claws. A grotesque shape leaned so far forward that Rob was sure it would fall over the shelf's edge, a jagged face crowned by a jester's cap. Its toothy maw opening and closing locked Rob's gaze with its own, emerald eyes aglow with hungry malevolence. A cloud passed over the moon. Rob screamed then, a scream like no other he had uttered before or since. The sound brought his grandparents at a run to find their grandson in tears, pressed flat against the headboard of the bed. A search of the closet turned up nothing. Though there were toys stored in its confines, none resembled a jack-in-the-box, nor did his grandparents ever recall owning one. He spent the rest of the night in his grandparents' bed, only after ensuring their bedroom closet was securely shut. That had been 30 years ago, yet here he was, creeping around his own house, terrified of open closet doors. Rob gave himself a mental shake. Ridiculous, he thought. Ridiculous and paranoid. He forced himself to walk down the hall to the closet, looked inside. Coats hung in an orderly fashion, in contrast to the shoes strewn about in the bag of golf clubs that had fallen half out of the closet. His bunched-up shoulders loosened. "Well, that explains that," he said aloud as he righted the bag. "Probably what woke me up." Upstairs, a door slammed. Rob nearly jumped out of his skin, every muscle tensed to the point of ache, every nerve a live wire, flooded with maximum voltage. He listened, every fiber of his being strained for so much as a whisper. Nothing. Seconds turned into a minute, then 2. Still, nothing. Rob eased his 4-iron out of the golf bag as quietly as he could manage. With the club gripped in both hands like a sword, still riding the adrenaline spike, he moved over to the stairs and began to climb, careful to step where he knew there were no creaks. Whoever, whatever, was upstairs. He didn't want them, to know he was coming, to find a place to hide, to ambush him. Calling the police momentarily crossed his mind, only to be discarded. The thought of looking foolish due to an overactive imagination overruled any fear of an intruder, armed or unarmed. He pushed away any fears of an intruder being something else. He reached the top of the stairs, flicked the light switch. The hall light sprung to life, shadows fleeing in the wake. To his right, the door to the master bedroom hung open. From the landing, he could see the walk-through closet to the ensuite bathroom. When they first moved in, Cassie had him remove the closet door to create a sensation of more space. At the time, it seemed silly. Now, Rob was grateful. It was the one closet in the house that never made him uneasy. Opposite the landing, the upstairs bathroom sat empty, door also, thankfully, open. Rob looked to the left, down the hall. At the far end, Noelle's closed door, bookending the master bedroom. Next to it, on the adjacent wall opposite the stairs, the closed door to the guest room. Nothing out of the ordinary. Loosening his grip on the golf club and pushed his glasses up his nose, Rob stepped into the hallway, turned down the hall towards the closed bedroom doors, guest room first. He stalked down the hall, club in one hand, the other outstretched, and reached for the doorknob. The brass knob felt cold to the touch as he pushed the door slowly and quietly open. Nothing stirred in the darkness. He hit the light switch. Vague, shadowy shapes jumped into clear definition. The double bed Cassie's folks slept in when they were in town, the tall dresser which held their clothes on those annual visits, the night tables, the easy chair, the open closet door. He froze. That door he knew had been closed. He had closed it himself earlier after retrieving Noelle's sleeping bag for guide camp. He was sure no one had been in the room since. Eyes fixed on the open closet, he edged towards the middle of the room, raised the 4-iron above his head, ready to strike. Boxes. Heavy-duty plastic bins piled up on the floor of the closet. Bins containing winter clothes. Bins full of clothing Noelle had outgrown, but Cassie wasn't willing to part with yet. Bins of photos and photo albums and Noelle's elementary school keepsakes, and nothing else. Just boxes. He took a deep breath. Noelle must have come in here for something, he muttered to no one in particular. With a sigh of relief, he turned off the light and stepped into the hall. His veins filled with ice. Noelle's bedroom door stood open. In stunned silence, he forced himself to cross the threshold into Noelle's bedroom. One trembling hand reached for the light, already knowing what it would reveal. Bed, night table, dresser, posters, nothing registered in his brain. Nothing but the open closet doors. Adrenaline pulsed through his body. Every hair on the back of his neck stood at attention. Every nerve writhed and sparked. With shaking footsteps, he approached the gulf between the 2 closet doors. Once again, he raised the golf club, ready to strike. A moment of déjà vu. 2 shelves lined the upper third of the closet, containing a scattered display of boxes, keepsakes, and old dolls. Below, Noelle's dresses and a few sweaters still hung from the closet bar. The floor was bare. Rob stood before the closet, confusion and relief mingling together. The closet was empty. No monsters of any kind. He turned, shoulders slumped, the tension emptying out of his back. Movement snagged the corner of his eye. Lightning fast, Rob swung the golf club with all his might, a reaction driven more by animal instinct than fear or reason. He found air. Nothing but air. Bewildered and on edge, he gazed at the space where he had seen the phantom movement and found only his own reflection, wide-eyed and crazed, looking back at him. Rob stared at himself, at the madman with the 4-iron captured in Noelle's vanity mirror against the wall by the bed. I look ridiculous, he thought. With an ever so slight edge of fading hysteria, he began to laugh and laugh. He laughed hard, so hard he failed to notice the darkness that gathered in the closet behind him, the sense of depth that filled the small space, the shadowy figure that emerged from its depths, its terrible reflection torn from the pages of nightmares, half-forgotten nursery rhyme, and the memories of a 7-year-old boy. The toothy maw, the spiky nose, the glowing green eyes below, the 3-pronged jester's cap, the white-gloved hands with razored claws at their fingertips. Sensing something, still chuckling to himself, Rob looked up into the vanity mirror. He never had a chance to scream.
Rob, we're home.
Cassie called from the open front door as she lowered her backpack to the floor.
Rob.
She stopped short at the sight of the open closet door and Rob's golf bag lying half in, half out of the closet.
Damn it, Rob.
She cursed under her breath. Cassie hated Rob's clubs filling up the hall closet. She loved their home, but what she wouldn't give for more closet space.
Hey, Dad.
Noelle bounded in the front door, still in her guide uniform, backpack on her back. She started up the stairs.
Mom, I'm gonna change and unpack, okay? That's fine, hun.
Cassie said.
If your dad's having a nap, can you wake him up, please? Sure thing, Mom.
Noelle replied as she continued up the stairs. From the landing, she could see into her parents' room. No dad. Looking down the hall, all the doors were open. Poking her head into the guest room, she still found no sign of her father, although the closet doors were hanging open, which was odd, given her dad's insistence on closing closet doors all the time. With a shrug, Noelle turned her back on the doors and headed to her room. Inside her room, Noelle stopped short. There, in the middle of her bedroom floor, in a pool of sunlight streaming in from her bedroom window, lay one of her dad's golf clubs.
That's weird,
she said as she shrugged out of her backpack and tossed it on the bed. She glanced around the room. Everything seemed to be in order, except on the otherwise empty closet floor, something glinted. Intrigued, Noelle knelt down before the closet. There, on the floor near the back, lay her dad's glasses. One lens was shattered, its surface a spiderweb of cracks.
Weird,
she said as she reached into the closet for the glasses. A cloud passed over the sun, darkening the room. And that was Closet Space by Brett O'Reilly. A fun little reminder that your childhood fears weren't irrational, they were correct. You were right to be afraid. Congratulations. Brett O'Reilly really nailed that creeping, slow burn dread. You know, the kind that sticks with you just long enough to make you hesitate before opening a dark room. If you'd like to reward them for their efforts, maybe leave your closet open tonight. I'm sure nothing will happen. Well, both of tonight's stories were brought to us by our dear friends at Velix Publishing. You can find more of their work if you're feeling brave or reckless. Either way. Now, before we go, quick question. How many of you just glanced towards your closet? Be honest. You're amongst friends. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, like, share, subscribe, or leave a comment. Say hi. Tell me what's lurking in your closet. Or just let me know how many of you turned on extra lights while listening. I keep track. Oh, and yes, Punxsutawney Phil has spoken. 6 more weeks of winter, which means 6 more weeks of long, cold nights. Convenient. We'll make sure you have plenty to listen to. Until next Tuesday, I'm Lucius Voss. Keep your lights low, keep your ears open, and if something calls your name in the closet, maybe don't answer. Good night.